Good evening, everybody. Thank you for coming. And today we have a treat for everybody's ears and eyes. And people who know Azra will understand what I'm saying, but people who've never met or heard Azra, you'll be a convert at the end of the session. So thank you very much for coming on this Saturday evening, Saturday afternoon. And as you know, it's appropriate to do the land acknowledgement. And this land where we are situated right now used to belong to some of the Indian tribes that used to live in this area. And we are thankful for their taking care of the land. And as you know, this land was never officially accessioned to the white man. And there were no compensation paid to the tribes in this area. So we are thankful for them for allowing us to stay in this area. And also, as you know, the bathrooms are over there on my left, on your right. And anytime you have to use the bathroom, you feel free to go there. And also, it's a good time to check your cell phones, make sure they are either off or on silent mode so nobody is disturbed by it. With that, I would like to tell you a little bit about South Asia Institute. And as you know, South Asia Institute, we started 2019, but then we had the pandemic and we were shut down for about 6 months. And we did the online versions of South Asia Institute, like SAI at home. And in fact, I kiddingly tell people that we were more well-known overseas than locally because there was hardly any foot traffic. And we had a number of conferences with India, Pakistan, England, and we had one creative morning where people from all the 5-6 continents joined in, and we had about 200 people, and we had a live presentation of our miniature exhibit at that time. So in short, what we do at South Asia Institute is we tell stories. And today is a part of the storytelling, and it's told by Azra in our vernacular and explained also at the same time. And we do visual art, we do plays, we do films, and we do cultural events like music also. So that, in a nutshell, is what the South Asia Institute does. The idea is to try to expose people about South Asians and what the South Asians are. For a long time, the narrative about South Asians had been told by non-South Asians. So we want to make sure that we tell the narrative, we tell the stories about South Asian, who we are, what we do, and all that. Because in the old days, when the narratives were told by the non-South Asian, people used to call us model minority, in the sense that we were highly educated, we came to this country, we worked hard, we earned good money, stayed in suburbs, and never complained. You know, never, we were like disappeared after 5 o'clock or so. So that's not the case with South Asians. South Asians are like any other minority, any other group, has its good points, bad points, and all that. So we want to tell our stories through our own eyes. And this is what the exhibit is all about South Asianness, meaning the paintings are done by South Asian with the South Asian eyes and with the South Asian brush. So please take a look whenever you have time at the end of the conversations, and you can get some ideas as to what they were talking about. With that, I would like to ask Shireen Ahmed to introduce Azra. And Azra, I thank you very much for coming. It's a pleasure, always pleasure, and nice seeing you, and we'll see you.
Thanks, Afzal. I want to also welcome Azra back to South Asia Institute, and welcome to all of you who joined us this evening. It's wonderful to see you all after all these months, and well, it's been more than months. It's after these years of being locked away in our homes. So Azra has been a great supporter of South Asia Institute. When it was just an idea, when we were just talking about it, when it was just a concept, and she was our first board member. So welcome back to South Asia Institute. So some of you, most of you know Azra. She doesn't need any introduction, but I think we have to start always with an introduction, and so I'm going to follow the routine. So Azra is the Chan Sun Xion, did I say it right? Professor of medicine and the director of the MDS Center, the Myelodysplastic Syndrome Center at Columbia University in New York. And she's considered an international authority on pre-leukemia and leukemia, and is one of those physician scientists, one of those rare physician scientists, I know how rare they are, having been in academics myself, who actually divides her time equally between clinical care and supervising a fully funded state-of-the-art basic research lab. She started collecting samples from her patients back in the 80s, and she now has the oldest and probably the largest tissue bank in the country. She's got over 60,000 samples in her collection. She's published over 300 peer-reviewed manuscripts in very high-profile journals. She's published over 1,000 abstracts and book chapters. And then she also is co-editor with her brother of the website 3 Quarks Daily, and I hope that a lot of you are getting his messages every day. It's some wonderful reading to start the day off. She's a sought-out speaker in scientific circles, and she's received numerous awards, including the Hope Award for cancer research. And she's also the member of the founder group designing breakthrough developments in science and technology with Bill Clinton. She's the author of a book. I hope all of you have bought it. If you haven't, let's order it on Amazon tonight. It's called The First Cell, The Human Cost of Pursuing Cancer to the Very End. And that book was published in 2019. And I'm so happy that we actually launched it here at South Asia Institute in 2020, February of 2020. So it's so wonderful to see you back here. It's a wonderful book where she talks about how both in medicine and in society, how we sort of mistreat cancer and how we ought to be doing better. So I hope that you'll all get her book. And then in addition to all of her scientific accomplishment, Azra is also a dedicated literary maven. I think that's the only way we can describe you. She's read more books and memorized more poetry than anybody I know of. And it's not just Urdu poetry, it's English literature as well. She's the co-author of Ghalib, Epistemologies of Elegance. And it's an extraordinary book, and she's going to be sharing some of those verses with us today. She not only translates the verses, but she also interprets them. And the book is out of print. You can get it. You can get an e-version, but I'm hoping that we can convince a publisher to publish it for us so we can literally hold it in our hands. Those of you who've known Azra are familiar with her mehfils that she had in her home. We miss them. I know that there are people in New York who are enjoying them. But not only were they enlightening, but there was always a very eclectic group of individuals at those sessions. And that's something that we truly miss. So it's wonderful having you back and getting some of those people back in this room this evening. Azra's going to, like Afzal said, she's going to be talking with us today and reciting some of that poetry, interpreting some of that poetry for us. You'll get a chance also to interact with her towards the end when we'll be joined by Sarah Alvi, who's also known her for a very long time. When we get done today, I think you'll really understand the impact and the allure of poetry and the effect that memorizing some of these wonderful verses can help us with understanding who we are and what we're all about. So with that, I'm going to let you start, Azra. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for doing that.
That was beautiful. So, can I just move this?
Yes, let's put it down here. Is that okay?
Adab and good afternoon. Since I am in my beloved city of Chicago, among so many good friends and benefactors, let me begin with an anecdote I recently read about the great novelist Saul Bellow, the Nobel laureate, who once asked, "Who is the Tolstoy of the Zulus? The Proust of the Papuans?" I'd be glad to read them. Ralph Wiley, a black sports writer, instantly answered Saul Bellow by saying, "Tolstoy is the Tolstoy of the Zulus. Proust is the Proust of the Papuans. Unless you find a profit in fencing off universal properties of mankind into exclusive tribal ownerships." Well, this is why I say that it is as pertinent to speak about the great Urdu poet Asadullah Khan Ghalib in Chicago as it is to speak about Ernest Hemingway in Pakistan. Because you see, Hemingway is the Hemingway of Pakistan and Ghalib is the Ghalib of Americans. Their concerns are universal. The questions they pose and the solutions they offer apply to all mankind. How fortunate to have Shireen and Afzal, the founders of this magnificent space, proudly claiming a place for South Asian Americans in Chicago, celebrating our great works of poetry and literature, music and philosophy, science and arts, introducing them to a Western audience, showing that the themes that bind us together are far stronger and more cohesive than those that separate us. I'm always humbled to be in this empowering, uplifting, splendid institute and in the company of this incredible, inspiring couple. Thank you, dear Shireen, dear Afzal, for inviting me once again. Today, I'm going to take one single couplet, or as I will refer to it from now on, a sher by Ghalib, to make the point that unpacking words compressed in his 2 lines force us to think harder about what it means to love deeply. How do we invest ourselves wholeheartedly in a quest, and through this exercise learn more about ourselves? So here is the sher. Teshe baghair mar na saka koh kan asad. Teshe baghair mar na saka koh kan asad. Sar gushte khumare rusumo quyud tha. There are 2 names in the first line. Asad is the name Ghalib used as a poet until he was 24. After that, he uses the name Ghalib, which means that this ghazal or poem was written by him when he was between 16 to 24 years of age. The second name besides Ghalib is that of Kohkan, referring to Farhad, the most famous lover or ashiq, the central character of a cherished love story in Persian mythology. He is called Kohkan because he was a mason, a stone cutter. Koh means mountain and Kohkan means mountain digger. There are many versions of this love story, but the two frequently cited ones are first from Nizami and the second from Firdausi in the Shahnameh. Farhad, a common man, a sculptor, falls in love with Shirin, the princess of Persian Armenia, a young woman widely admired for her dazzling beauty. But Shirin was already betrothed to Khusro, the Sasanian king, the king of Persia. As Farhad's uncontrolled, wild, maniacal obsession exploded in the public eye and became an embarrassing, scandalous spectacle for the king, Khusro tried to distract Farhad by promising to give up Shirin if he would cut a stream of water through the particularly dense, steep, rocky mountain called Behestun in western Iran. Khusro was confident that it is an undoable task, but Farhad took up the challenge with unparalleled gusto, working tirelessly day and night with only an axe in hand. And finally, to everyone's utter surprise and delight, he managed to accomplish the impossible. Here it's worth noting that the river broke through the mountain, and the spray created by water falling over rocks and stones gave it a white color, such that from a distance, when people first sighted the white foam coming down the mountain, they exclaimed in wonder that Farhad had cut a stream of milk from the mountains. This is the famous Jue-Shir, the river of milk, referred to Ghalib in this gorgeous sher. Kaave kaave sakht jani hai tanhai na pooch. Kaave kaave sakht jani hai tanhai na pooch. Subha karna sham ka, lana hai jue sheer ka. Don't ask me about the hardships of life and my loneliness. Just surviving from dawn to dusk is as hard as digging the stream of milk. Subha karna sham ka, lana hai jue sheer ka. Sorry for the digression here, but this sher reminds me of another fantastically poignant one. I don't know the name of this poet, but I heard he wrote it when he was a young man. It has the same sentiment as Subha karna sham ka, lana hai jue sheer ka. This poet says, Chalo main zindagi bhi kaat lunga. Chalo main zindagi bhi kaat lunga. I'm willing to go through a lifetime. What's a lifetime? It's a nothing. I'm willing to go through the lifetime. Look at how beautiful this sher is. Chalo main zindagi bhi kaat lunga, agar ye aaj ka din kat gaya to. I'm willing to go through a lifetime. That's easy. The difficulty is how to get through today. Returning to the story in question, when Khusro was told that Farhad had conquered nature to win his challenge and was now on his way to claim the promised prize, Khusro panicked. He now concocted a particularly deadly plan. An old woman was sent to interrupt Farhad's journey midway to tell him that Shirin had died. Upon hearing this, Farhad used the very tesha, axe, with which he had been digging to kill himself. So this is the background story in the sher. Teshe baghair mar na saka koh kan asad. Sar gushtae khumare rusumo quyud tha. Without an axe, Kohkan was not able to die Asad. His head was spinning with the customs and rules. According to most classic interpretations, Ghalib is questioning the exalted place that Farhad occupies as one of the great lovers in literature by pointing out that just about anyone can commit suicide with an axe. If Farhad's love for Shireen was truly as great as he claimed it to be, then the news of her death alone should have instantaneously caused his heart to stop and for him to drop dead. But no, his heart did not stop. He had to rely on an axe to kill himself. How did this act prove Farhad's extraordinary love? It was rules and rituals, customs and traditions rather than madness or intensity of desire that killed him. He died like any other ordinary person would die. Well, most people interpret the Sher as Ghalib being playful in taking a loving swipe at Farhad to make a point rather than being vicious or demeaning him in any way. For one thing, Ghalib in all of his writings combines curiosity, a sense of wonder with profound empathy. For another, you can see Ghalib declaring his profound respect for Farhad in this sher. Di sadgi se jaan, padun koh kan ke paon. So moving. दी सादगी से जान पढ़ूं कोह कन के पांव है हाथ क्यों ना टूट गए पीर जन के पांव. For his innocence I will go and fall at Kohkan's feet. Why, alas, did not the old woman's legs break? So what is the point Ghalib is making? Well, he is doing what great writers are supposed to do, pushing the limits, imagining new interpretations of old stories, keeping us woke by constantly throwing challenges at us. In this sher, he is basically saying, granted we cannot be great lovers in real life, but really, is Farhad the best lover we can imagine even in our storytelling and folklore? One who kills himself for the most mundane reasons using the most common and ordinary custom? Surely we can do better. Implicit in his criticism of Farhad is, of course, the suggestion that Ghalib would have fared better. There's an oft-repeated idiom that comes from Shakespeare, the world's mine oyster. An oyster may be hard to open, but sometimes, very rarely, it can yield a pearl. We usually say this to the young. The world is your oyster, meaning the possibilities in life ahead are infinite. Crack open every oyster you find, and one of these days you might get lucky, or not. But the point is, it is the effort you must continuously invest. Ghalib, who fully appreciated the tragedies of the human condition, does not allow himself to revel in despair. Rather, he shares the sentiment with the great American writer Zora Neale Hurston, who said, "No, I don't weep at the world. I'm too busy sharpening my oyster knife." He is always ready to tackle new challenges, push the envelope, blaze the trail. This sher is a perfect example where we see Ghalib using his sharpened oyster knife to examine an ancient story with new eyes. His is a refreshing and startlingly novel way of looking at the world, one we cannot help admire. He asks us to do the same, add insight to eyesight with a fresh look, especially when it comes to received wisdom. He refuses to accept things on face value. He is defiant, showing a sense of self that is so unique that prophets and legendary lovers pale before him. So can you imagine a better lover than Farhad? Well, Ghalib thought so. And guess what? He was proved right recently. Irma Garcia, a 48-year-old mother of 4, was the teacher shot dead at Uvalde Elementary School in Texas last month. Her husband, Joe Garcia, went to lay flowers on her memorial and dropped dead. Newspapers reported that he died of a broken heart. The high school sweethearts, were buried together side by side as their 4 young children watched. Would Joe Garcia meet Ghalib's standards of a great lover? Let us examine the sher in this light now. The first line is quite straightforward. Teshe baghair mar na saka kohkan Asad. Without an axe, Kohkan was not able to die Asad. But then comes this dense second line that has been interpreted differently by several authors. None of the 11 sharas that I consulted could clarify the meaning. Sar gushtae khumare rusumo quyut tha. The question I ask myself is, what are the customs and rituals that Ghalib is referring to? His head was spinning with customs and rituals. What customs and rules? I called Professor Afzal Sayyed at Habib University in Karachi, someone I deeply respect as a scholar of Urdu poetry, for in his interpretation of the line. He gave a very interesting response. He said Farhad was a stonemason by profession, and what he was most accustomed to was the use of an axe. Even in the act of killing himself, he remained true to the familiar ritual and custom of his life. Another widely acknowledged interpreter of Ghalib, Nazm, is quoted by Professor Francis Pritchett as saying, "It is a taunt against Kohkan for being so bound to custom and rule, which is contrary to madness and freedom. If the intoxication of passion had been perfect, he would have died without smashing open his head." The third one is Najib Jung, the 20th Lieutenant Governor of Delhi, who recently translated the entire Diwan-e-Ghalib into English. Beautiful, beautiful translation. This is how he translates. Farhad could not die without the axe Asad. The madness was because of his customs and rituals. I asked Najib to clarify his translation and give me an interpretation. He generously spent some time on it and sent me this. Ghalib's concept of a true lover places Farhad beyond a normal person. I think he feels Farhad let down true lovers, wasn't evolved enough, and chose to opt for the axe. The second line is extremely complex. How would a true lover die? There's no explanation. But it's clear that Ghalib is disappointed that Farhad selects the traditional way that he has seen through his times, hence the choice of the word rusumo quyud. Well, I love all these 3 interpretations. This is the genius of Ghalib. He remains nuanced enough, ambiguous enough to leave room for multiple readings of the same 2 lines. I'm not trying to score any points over the 3 previous interpretations. But a slightly different one occurred to me. When Farhad heard the news of Shireen's death, according to Ghalib, he made a deliberate choice to kill himself. Why? I think because he imagined the quotidian of daily life. He would go to sleep, get up the next morning, he would have breakfast, go to work. And this is what sent his head into a tailspin, because without the quest for Shireen, everything becomes meaningless. What good would the rituals of living be without Shireen? In a flash of a second, the insignificance, the emptiness of life without a purpose, a goal, an aim worth fighting for hit him, and he could not bear to live for another second. In other words, it was a calculated decision brought on by the imagined rituals and customs rather than an emotional one. Rekindling an ancient story, Ghalib seems to be asking us a larger question. How do we make decisions? The Nobel laureate Danny Kahneman says in one of 2 ways, thinking fast or slow. More than 90% of our decisions in daily life are fast or intuitive. The remainder are slow, made by weighing the pros and cons carefully. Ultimately, though everything we decide, whether we think fast or slow, involves emotions. The historian Yuval Noah Harari suggests that the entire human body basically functions as a calculator. Feelings are biochemical valuations acquired over millennia to make good decisions. For example, most of us crave sweets. It's because over thousands of years we have learned that sugar can give us an instant source of energy. So our tongues and sense of taste evolved to prefer sugar over other foods. This was a purely biochemical learning process. My hesitation before a second helping of ice cream involves not just the experience culled from decades of my lifetime, but also thousands of years of collective evolution of our species. Now let us consider a more complicated choice. I need money for my family. I have two choices. I can accept a higher paying job, but the boss is horrible and I'll be miserable. Or I can take a lower paying job, but the boss is really nice and we'll have a great time. The final decision I make will depend on the calculation made by my body to decide which of the two jobs is likely to make me feel better, being happy myself or making my family happy. In other words, emotions and feelings compute and calculate probabilities constantly, and they are the final deciders in whether we are thinking fast or slow. In the light of the above scientific and biochemical explanations of the decision-making process, how do I perceive the choice Farhad made and why? Had Farhad's body been trained deeply enough by the biochemical intensity of his feelings for Shireen, the surge of grief itself would have been sufficient to calculate the consequences of her demise and caused his heart to stop. That would have been the intuitive thinking fast solution, a proof of his deep love. But Ghalib suggests that in Farhad's case, it was the slow, intentional, deliberate action rather than an intuitive one. Ultimately, both were driven by emotions, but in one case, the body would be trained by the biochemical training, while in the other, it's the brain with a logical reasoning. If we assume that Joe Garcia is the better lover who died of a broken heart, it suggests that decisions in his body were made by biochemical algorithms. Does that mean we have no free will? What would I have done if I was faced with this situation? Well, I was faced with this situation multiple times when my husband Harvey was dying, an exceedingly painful death from cancer that stretched over a long, tormented 4 years. The weird and unexpected thing I learned about myself through this experience was that even in the darkest moments of the tragic events, when my biochemical algorithms wanted me to end my own life, it turned out that my decisions always took into account one sober fact. What would happen to our little 4-5-year-old daughter if she lost both parents? In my case, reason overruled emotion. The Greeks have been saying forever that in every moment we do have a choice. In the Oresteia, Agamemnon did not have to sacrifice his 18-year-old virgin daughter Iphigenia so the winds would carry his ships to Troy. Clytemnestra did not have to kill Agamemnon to avenge her daughter's death. And then Orestes did not have to kill his mother to avenge his father's death. Each one of them had a choice. Biochemical or not, at every step, the choices are in our hands. And the second thing I realized is that women are hardwired to react even when we respond intuitively and instantaneously, even when we don't have children. We always think about the consequences of our actions on others. Not so the men. When they are in love, they're ready to kill themselves. So does this mean women can never be great lovers? Well, what about Juliet and Shireen, who also killed herself once she found that Farhad had died? Maybe these are exceptions to the rule, or maybe I'm completely wrong. I will leave it all up to you to decide. What I can say is that in this particular sher, for some reason, has haunted me for years. It is Ghalib's genius that he makes us think. At the oddest of moments, especially when I'm facing a particularly difficult choice, I ask myself what the customs dictate versus what my heart wants. And then I remember the choice that Farhad made and why. And I say to myself, Teshe baghair mar na saka koh kan asad, sar gushte khumare rusumo quyud tha. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Azra. That was beautiful. We're going to have Saira Ali join Azra for a conversation here. And Saira has known Azra for a very long time as well. And she's also someone who's no stranger. Saira's also no stranger to most of you here in the audience, so please have a seat. But for those who have not met Saira before, she has her master's in global management from the London School of Economics and a PhD in molecular oncology from Rush University here in Chicago. Saira is the founder and CEO of Precision's Diagnostic Laboratories that provides genomic and molecular diagnostic bioinformatics and education in personalized medicine internationally. She's been surrounded by literary great minds ever since her childhood. And as a book ambassador, she also regularly had hosted writers and poets and musicians in her home. And we've had the pleasure of attending some of those events as well. And over the years, Saira has also supported numerous local arts organizations here in Chicago. And as I said, she's a close friend of Azra's, and I couldn't think of a better person than to have the two of you in conversation this evening. Thank you for doing this. I'll get you. Can I? You have? Do you want this? Do you have? Okay.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Shireen. It is such an honor to have Dr. Raza here in the city. We actually moved together to Chicago, right? So she's my mentor, she's a friend, and most importantly, she's our guest tonight. And we thank her for sparing the time to be with us this evening. I remember the first time I met Dr. Raza, she immediately invited me to her house for Urdu Mehfil. And I, in her typical style, was assigned a couplet of Ghalib to memorize. Do you remember that? Okay. And I still remember that couplet because, such was the pressure to memorize and understand Ghalib. And it was a tough one. Husn ghamze ki kashakash se chuta mere baad. Bare aaram se hain ahle jafa mere baad. हूँ है दिल खाक में अहवाले बुता पर यानी उनके हाथ हुए मोहताजे उनके नाखून हुए मोहताजे हिना मेरे पास. I'm going to have Dr. Raza quickly explain this to you guys.
Thank you, Saira. It's a pleasure sharing a stage with you. And my God, mashallah, you have become such an accomplished leader, scientist you always were. But just to tell everybody, Dr. Saira Alvi got her PhD with me and ran my lab for practically 20 years single-handedly. And her style was, when new people came, she would just tell them, darling, you are horrible. Let's do it again. So she's a great leader. She really made a big difference in my career because I did not have to turn around ever and worry about how, if bone marrows and blood samples are being received, are they being handled properly or not, because Saira made sure that every cell in those samples coming from patients is treated with deep and profound respect. And so I'm deeply grateful to you, Saira, for that.
Thank you.
खूं है दिल खाक में अहवाले बुतां पर यानी उनके नाखुन हुए मोहताज हिना मेरे बाद. This is Ghalib, but Ghalib wrote this sher actually after मीर तकी मीर शेर. यूं तो हंस हंस के लगाता है वो मेहंदी लेकिन and the whole idea is in both shairs. Something very beautiful that I love about Urdu poetry is that the love doesn't last until one's lifetime. It goes beyond lifetime into the grave. खूं है दिल खाक में अहवाले बुतां पर यानी, meaning I am now dead, I am underground, I am buried 6 feet deep, and yet my heart is crying because now my beloved has to put on mehndi to color her nails. Before, she could just dip her nails in my wounds and they would be red. Oh God.
और दूसरा शेर तो बड़ा मुश्किल है.
Which one was that?
इसी का अगला जो है उनके वो जो नहीं पहला शेर जो था हुस्न गमज़े की. गमज़ा नहीं पता लोगों को, आपको पता है, मैंने भी आपसे सीखा था.
हुस्न गमज़े की कशाकश से छुटा मेरे बाद बारे आराम से हैं अहले जफा मेरे बाद. It's all a meditation on once I'm dead, what's going to happen. And Ghalib declares himself to be the greatest lover because he's saying that the beautiful ones stopped embellishing themselves, stopped showing the kinds of coquetry that they would show when I was around, because now nobody is worth the trouble that they should take. Ghamza is, adain and gorgeous. I would say
Makeup
coquetry
and
is
the
whole thing. Beautiful. I mean, I think the whole concept of husn ghamze ki kashakash se chuta mere baad, बारे आराम से हैं अहले जफा मेरे बाद. खूं है दिल खाक में अहवाले बुतां पर यानी उनके नाखुन हुए
मुहताज हिना. So you guys can see how challenged we were. Dr. Raza. So we have known, there's another person in the audience, Sunil, for a very long time professionally. I mean, I think few decades. There's her very good friend Seema Khan sitting here, who's known her all her life practically. So I'm very cautious what I'll say because Seema knows more. But there's another side of Dr. Raza that has always been there, is this, that she taught all of us to learn to do things simultaneously, in the sense, I remember saying, I can't come to Urdu Mehfil, I'm writing a thesis. She said, darling, you're going to write the thesis, you're going to come to the Urdu Mehfil, you're going to feed the kids. Okay, so get going. So that's how all of her life has been. So she's taught us a very important lesson there. And Urdu Mehfil, which you guys some of you may have attended, they don't exist anymore in Chicago. ये रुखसत हुए तो उर्दू महफिल भी रुखसत हो गई इनके साथ. So it was something where everyone came together every Friday night at her residence. She was very generous. She opened the house, and everyone with kids and family and friends showed up. We had, simple meal, some meal we always had for them, and dessert. And we did at least 1 or 2 ghazals of Ghalib. And in Chicago Urdu Mehfil, Ifti Naseem, very good friend of Azra and all of us, and Naeem Saab used to be regular attendees. And then a lot of visiting scholars, Urdu Dan, people would come, we would have a mehfil with them, including Sara Suleri. So that's She was daughter of Z.S. Suleri, very well-known journalist and writer. And Sarah, remember first time she came with her husband, Goodyear, and so we met her at your place. And where I'm going is this, that I'm going to ask Sunil, because we who come from Pakistan know Urdu and are, at least we grow up listening to Urdu shairi or Urdu as a language. But a lot of our audience in Urdu Mahfil were not Urdu speaking. So I can't but help Sunil ask him, what did he get out of Urdu Mahfil, or learning about Ghalib? Sunil? There's a mic here.
Well, while Sunil is getting ready, I didn't finish the Mir Sher, I realized.
There you go.
यूं तो हंस हंस के लगाता है वो मेहंदी, लेकिन खून रुलाएगा उसे रंग हिना मेरे बाद.
Wow, wow.
Wow. This is what drew us to Urdu Mahfil. Really, that although I do come from a non-Urdu speaking community, being in Mumbai, growing up in Mumbai, we always call it as Hagmi language, which is, Urdu is a part of that. Hindi, Urdu, Gujarati, Marathi, and English. We speak a mix of all of this. So, it was a familiar thing, but it was great to share the passion for poetry, understand in her interpretation, in a brilliant interpretation, how each poet really drew different sketches of life and sketches of emotions. So but Dr. Azra, I'm really curious that from those Urdu mahfils and mushairas and all of that, it was all just sharing verbally, right? How did it all morph into writing a book?
Yes.
So that's really interesting.
And with Sarah, when you finally decided to pen down, please tell us about that journey.
Yeah.
So this book that Shireen is referring to is not in publication, but probably soon get another cycle.
It's available online though, ebooks. So anyone who wants it, Ghalib, Epistemologies of Elegance. Well, thank you so much, Sunil. You brought back wonderful memories. Sunil worked in my lab for some 12 years and was an amazing scientist. The groundbreaking work he did on apoptosis remains the groundwork on which all therapeutic studies are conducted in myelodysplastic syndromes. And I'm so thankful to Sunil because he made a difference in patients' lives. And that's a huge thing, really, this translation of science. Thank you, Sunil. And I remember fondly that sometimes we would have 20, 25 postdocs and scientists working in my lab and Harvey's lab. And of course, I was very selfish because I wanted to really understand Ghalib. And so I started when I was 28 years old, living in Buffalo, just take out the Diwan-e-Ghalib, and my friend Seema, who's here somewhere in the audience. Seema is here, Dr. Seema Khan from Northwestern, a leader in breast cancer surgery. We started reading just a ghazal with several sharas around us and my older sister to understand, because I felt that if you understand Ghalib properly, then you would understand the nuances of Urdu poetry in general. And so every Friday, I made it a business, Friday or Sunday, one of the 2 days, we would sit down, or Seema and I in the beginning, and then friends started joining and it became a little mehfil. And it took me 20 years, but we read the Diwan-e-Ghalib at least twice, if not more, the whole thing, with sharas around us, to thoroughly steep ourselves into what he's saying. And the result was that now one couplet of Ghalib, to understand or explain that, took me, as you saw, half an hour or so, because there's so much that he packs into 2 lines. I often compare it to almost like the DNA code, the 2 strands of DNA
Yes.
that genes are made up of contain the same kind of macrocosm, the same kind of enormous amounts of information that 2 lines of a couplet contain. And so Urdu Mehfil started like that, and for 20 years I was just reading Ghalib, and then of course everyone else, Mir and Josh and Faz and Anis and Dabir, everybody. But Ghalib remained my most important foundational poet. And then I met Sara Suleri, whose mother was Welsh and her father was Pakistani. And so Sara had this Western sensibility. And because I felt that the message of Ghalib was so universal, he never belonged to a party, he didn't have like tribal tendencies of any sort. He was very universal. And I felt it was so important to look at his work through the Western eye. And once I met her, I knew immediately that this is the person I'm going to work with to interpret Ghalib. Because translation is impossible. And
Yeah,
so that's
absolutely.
how we decided. And luckily, you were there in Cincinnati when Sara came for the first time in 1991.
92, 93.
No,
yeah.
92 we moved to Chicago.
Chicago,
So
right.
she came in 91, and instantly when I said to her that, Sara, I would love to interpret Ghalib with you, because by then I felt I was ready. And she agreed. But then life intervened. My Harvey got sick. We moved to Chicago. She got married. Her husband died.
Sheher was
My
born.
husband died. Yes, Sheher
Was
was
born.
born. I had a baby. So all kinds of things happened, and it took another 15 years before we could get back together. And then we spent 1.5 years basically joined at the hip in Massachusetts. And sometimes one share would take us 2-3 days of debating about what he's really saying. But once we agreed on a meaning, then Sara would say to me, because Sara was a professor of English at Yale, and what a writer, my God. Meatless Day is her very famous book. Then once we agreed on a meaning, Sunil, then Sara would say, okay, Azra, let me put this into difficult English now.
So this book is not the entire Divan of Ghalib. How did you guys decide which ghazals you were going to transliterate or translate?
I think mainly I chose the ghazals I liked.
Okay.
By 21, I was moving to New York. We didn't have, again, it just got broken, and we decided, let's just publish these.
Okay.
We were supposed to do a lot more, but then life intervened again, so we stopped.
Well, we are very grateful we have this, and for the people who are bilingual or even understand English, then this is a very beautiful book to own and have. Dr. Raza, so Ghalib, you said, is been your favorite, always, a foundation. So a big theme in Ghalib is mohabbat, love, or trying to achieve that, or be there. He does profess that he is the ultimate lover. जिस तरह आप पहले भी शेर में बता रहे थे कि वो फरहाद से भी आगे हैं शायद अपने ज़हन में. So tell us a little bit more about how you see this aspect. What is your thoughts on love?
It's the only thing worth living for. I think, in my opinion, the most beautiful thing in life is really an adult intimate relationship. There is nothing that surpasses that. And then love can be for other things also, but you can have a love for your work, your profession, your art, whatever you want to do. But I think I really feel that as Dante in his Divine Comedy, after going through Inferno, Purgatorio, and then Paradiso, eventually concludes that the thing that makes the universe go round is love. And I think इश्क पर जोर नहीं है ये वो आतिश गालिब,
लगाए न लगे.
और के लगाए न लगे और बुझाए न बने. I love that. और बुझाए न बने. That's a very important thing. And that I think summarizes. इश्क पर जोर नहीं है ये वो आतिश गालिब, के लगाए न लगे और बुझाए न बने.
बहुत खूब. I would. Do you think we can take some questions from the audience?
More than
I-
questions, let them participate and have a
Participate,
conversation with them.
Seema,
Sure.
you're going to be the first. We can't
Yes,
let-
please.
Yes.
Well, I certainly remember those days well when Azra and Bibi and I would sit with volumes around us. Bibi had a long perspective on the Urdu language, on Farsi, because there's so much Farsi. There was always a lot of consultation of dictionaries for Farsi, and Bibi's Farsi is actually quite good. So she gave us, I think, a historical perspective and a depth of knowledge that was very important. And Azra's energy drove the whole thing. So I learned more about Urdu poetry in Ghalib in those 5 years or so that we were together in Buffalo than I knew then, or any knowledge that I've acquired since. So unfortunately, I have not followed through in the same way, but Azra's deep interest and emotional connection, I think, with this literature is inspiring.
Thank you so much, Seema. I really feel what Seema said is so true, that I am so deeply moved by Urdu poetry. I don't know how to convey my sense of pure joy that I have. I feel every day some sher comes into my head and then it grabs me, and all day I'm reciting that sher and thinking about it, and the joy that it brings you. Oh my God. It's unbelievable.
Well, I am witness to Dr. Raza calling my mother, who is a professor of literature overseas, and for hours, browbeating this share into some sense that they both want to make. So that is true. Any other person? Questions? Ji Sufi Saab?
क्या गालिब को समझने के लिए फारसी का जानना जरूरी है?
जो ये कहे कि रेख्ता क्यों कर हो रश के फारसी, गुफ्ते गालिब एक. जो ये कहे कि रेख्ता, उर्दू का पुराना नाम रेख्ता था. जो ये कहे कि रेख्ता क्यों कर हो रश के फारसी, यानी फारसी से बेहतर कोई ये कहे कि कभी हो ही नहीं सकती उर्दू फारसी से बेहतर. गालिब क्या कहते हैं? जो ये कहे कि रेख्ता क्यों कर हो रश के फारसी, गुफ्ते गालिब एक बार पढ़कर उसे सुना के यूं. तो गालिब को समझने के लिए फ़ारसी का जानना बिल्कुल ज़रूरी नहीं है हमारे ख़्याल में, क्योंकि फ़ारसी का कलाम उनका एक तरफ है और उर्दू का एक तरफ. और जो लोग ये कहते हैं, बार बार हमने ये सुना है कि गालिब ने कई दफ़े ये कहा कि अगर मेरा फ़ारसी का कलाम नहीं पढ़ा आपने तो उर्दू का कलाम तो बेरंग है उसके सामने. ऐसी बातें लोग कहते हैं. दैट्स एब्सोल्युटली नॉट ट्रू. As proved by this sher, he himself is saying that people who think Urdu can never compare with Farsi, read out one sher of Ghalib to them and they'll be convinced. So that's my answer to you.
Fahad Saab, aap sawal, comment? Mars.
जी
ताना बख्शत खुदा बख्शंदा आप लोगों की मौजूदगी हमारे लिए बायस सादत।
क्या बात। Marcia has a question.
I got very fascinated in this discussion about the mehfil and having all these different commentaries on Ghalib and kind of looking at them for ideas. And I'm wondering if you could, at one level, simply recommend some of these commentaries, but also I'm interested in, if it's not too academic, sort of the idea of how they've evolved through time. Right, so sort of early Sharah and then contemporary, and I'm wondering if there are even, let's say, female commentaries and gender and look, sort of asking new questions of the material. If you could comment on that.
What a beautiful comment and question. I love that. Yes, I can't recommend any one particular shara because I really look at the same sher in different sharas. And one of the most irritating things is when the author of the shara simply says, "Ye sher to wo bahut aasan hai, samajh mein aa gaya hoga." This one is too easy, you probably understood, so let's move on to the next one. It's just not right. Anyway, I love Ghulam Rasool Meher, who is, of course, the Ustad forever for everybody. But Yusuf Salim Chishti is another, Shamsur Rahman Farooqi. And in my opinion, one of the nicest things that happens, think about it, Ghalib was born in 1797 and he dies in 1869. And today, in 2022, for the last 15 years, every single Friday in New York City on 119th and Amsterdam, there is a Greek cafe in which sits a woman, Professor Frances Pritchett, professor of Urdu at Columbia University. And she sits there, and you can just simply go and join and get your own salad or whatever you want to eat and join her at the table, and she reads a ghazal of Ghalib every single Friday without fail for the last 15 years. I know people from Minnesota and Fargo, North Dakota, who are coming to New York for a visit. They will keep that few hours on a Friday evening to go and sit with Franny Pritchett. What a great thing that Ghalib is alive and kicking on Amsterdam and 119th. I really celebrate just that fact. And the reason I am telling you this is that Frances Pritchett, who's a very dear friend of mine, when your mother came, I took her to Saira's mother is an authority on Ghalib and Urdu literature, student of Anne-Marie Chamel. What an amazing scholar of Urdu she is, and I simply adore her. If I don't understand a sher, I call her up. I call up all kinds of people all the time and say, explain this to me because I'm just confused. And she always is able to come up with the right answer. When she was visiting me in New York, I took her to the Mehfil and we had a great time. And the whole idea is that Franny Pritchett has now put everything at your fingertips, at one-click efficiency. She has Diwan-e Ghalib. Her thing is called A Desert Full of Roses. And every single sher of the Diwan-e Ghalib she has taken, and she has provided sharas and meanings for that sher from multiple authors, from Maulvi Tabatabai to Nazm, which I just quoted. Anyone who has interpreted, she gives those interpret. But after that, she gives her own. So she is a contemporary figure living now, and she has put it all online. If you don't understand a sher, simply go to the website, Ghalib, A Desert Full of Roses, and you can find not just one interpretation, but multiple interpretations by the Asatiza. And yet new meanings will occur to you, as they do to me after reading him for 20 years from so many different sources. You still get insights into yourself, by reading him over and over. So that's my fascination and seduction of Ghalib, is just that he makes me think about things that matter to me and how I can do better than that. Kavish ka dil kare hai taqaza ke hai hanooz. Oh my God, this sher is so beautiful. This sher to me epitomizes Ghalib's philosophy of life and what each of us should be doing. Kavish ka dil kare hai taqaza ke hai hanooz. Nakhun pe qarz us girahe neem baaz ka. As long as there is one single knot left in the universe which is half undone, your work is not done. Kavish is koshish. Kavish is continuous striving for something, answers. Kavish ka dil kare hai taqaza ke hai hanooz. Nakhun pe qarz us girahe neem baaz ka. And this is what I'm saying to you, that I get one sher in my head in the morning and then it inspires me all day. And because I have my friend Donna Myers sitting here.
Oh, hi, Donna.
Hi, Donna. Donna comes to visit me in New York regularly. I come to Chicago to visit her. She's one of my best friends that I have. So, Donna, because you are here and so kind of you to listen to a mehfil in Urdu, thank you so much. I want to recite a contemporary of Ghalib, who's one of my favorite poets, is Emily Dickinson. And let me recite a couple of things for Donna. And I gave a talk actually called Ghalib and Emily Dickinson about their contemporary things. It's on YouTube if anyone wants to watch. But here's something for Donna. I felt a cleavage in my mind, as if my brain was split. I tried to match it seam by seam, but could not make them fit. The thought behind I strove to join unto the thought before, but sequence raveled out of reach like balls upon the floor. Isn't she great, Emily Dickinson? And the same kind of thought process that Ghalib has. I measure every grief I meet with analytic eyes. Measuring grief is such a gorgeous concept. I measure every grief I meet with analytic eyes. I wonder if it weighs like mine or has a different size.
Oh, wow.
I wonder if they had it long or did it just begin. I cannot find the date of mine. It's been so long a pain. I wonder if it hurts to live and if they have to try, and whether, could they choose between, they would not rather die.
Beautiful. So, any more questions? Ji, go ahead.
Can we put the lights on,
Shirin, can we have lights on so then
I
she
want
can
to
sit
see
on?
my interlocutors.
Here, I've got the microphone. Here.
It doesn't have to do so much with Ghalib's poetry itself. I haven't read much. I know about Ghalib. I have read some of it. I, as you said, am more comfortable with English, with Emily Dickinson, etc. But my question was, when you said that Ghalib believes that he is the expert on love, if I'm not mistaken in my understanding, about Farhad and why he killed himself and all that. Did Ghalib go through personally? Did he go through this personally to feel so intensely about this emotion that we all have, which is love? If you could throw some light on that, I'd appreciate it. Thank you so much.
That's a gorgeous question because it makes you think. Well, I was with some friends last night it was a very sweet conversation when I asked them, well, was your marriage arranged? And the answer they gave is so unique. I mean, you hear this, a lot of people ask, was your marriage an arranged marriage? They said, yes, it's arranged now, but first it was love. now it's an arrangement. Ghalib was married off at 13 years of age to Umrao Begum, his wife, who was from the house of Loharo in Agra. And so Nawabi to the Ghalib khud himself, and of course she was also a cousin and not a cousin, but anyway, he marries at 13, and he loved her deeply, respected her deeply. He never disrespected her, and they had 5, and some people say 7 even, children, all of whom died before they turned 2. So there was some kind of a thing about one of the congenital things that the children, and they were completely, at that time, considered normal children. So Ghalib suffered so profoundly from this grief, the loss of all these children and his wife, but he remained true to Umrao Begum all his life. So I would think that, yes, he experienced a very profound sentiment with this woman for so many years.
His nephew.
He then, her nephew,
Who did not say
Arif, yes, who died. But there is Ghalib is such an original thinker. One of Ghalib's contemporaries was Mir Anis, and no one can write a marsiya like Mir Anis. And Ghalib himself tried to write a marsiya, wrote 4 stanzas and then stopped because he said कि मीर अनीस के होते हुए मरसिया लिखने का मतलब ये है कि मीर अनीस का नहीं, मरसिए का मुंह चिढ़ा रहे हैं. So he stops himself from writing, and yet he writes in a new genre where he writes a ghazal like a marsiya, and people claim that it's for a domni that he was madly in love with at 24, 25 years of age, and she died a very tragic death suddenly. And so he writes, दर्द से मेरे है तुझको बेकरारी, हाय हाय क्या हुई जालिम तेरी गफलत शियारी, हाय हाय तेरे दिल में गर न था आशोबे गम का हौसला, तूने फिर क्यों की थी मेरी गम गुसारी, हाय हाय शर्म रुसवाई से जा छुपना नकाबे खाक में. Oh my God. शर्म रुसवाई से जा छुपना नकाबे खाक में, खत्म है उल्फत की तुझ पे पर्देदारी, हाय हाय हाय. Makes me cry, sorry, I get so emotional. It's such a beautiful thing. Adab.
I have a question. In your reading of Ghalib or Urdu poetry in general, and in the world of oncology that you practice for so long, have you come across any pieces of poetry, any ashars that inspire you, or you think that, because there is, in regards to dil and dard and abla pai, there's plenty of stuff there, but in terms of cancer, is there anything?
Yes, there's plenty. Well, That's a very deep question you asked and a comment you asked me to say. First of all, think of this sher of Ghalib. Ibn Maryam hua kare koi, are mere dukh ki dawa kare koi. Jesus could have raised someone from the dead. Lazarus he raised up. That's easy. Ghalib says, that's easy. Find a cure for my pain. That is the difficult part. इब्ने मरियम हुआ करे कोई, अरे मेरे दुख की दवा करे कोई. कौन है जो नहीं है हाजतमंद, किसकी हाजत रवा करे कोई. क्या किया खिज़र ने सिकंदर से, अब किसे रहनुमा करे कोई. I mean, so, and one more share I want to read for you, because you see, in disease and illness there is a difference between cure and healing. You can find a cure for something, but then the violations that the person has suffered, how do you bring that healing? There is a share of Ghalib that has made me understand not only the difference between the two, but how to deal with my patients who many times are dying and I'm walking all the way to their last breath with them. This is a gorgeous share of Ghalib. That ghazal, छूटा महे नक्शब की तरह दस्ते क़ज़ा से, तू दोस्त किसी का भी सितमगर न हुआ था, औरों पे है वो जुल्म जो मुझ पे न हुआ था. And he comes to this amazing sher कि I'll come to it in a second. But the myth in Urdu poetry, you see, is that it is the season's first rain and the first few raindrops from that first rain, which if they go into the mouth of a clam, they become a pearl. So if you don't happen to be the first few drops of the first rain of the season, then you have no hope. But Ghalib gives hope to those few drops of rain. And the difference between the fact, the line is, आँखों में है वो कतरा जो गौहर न हुआ था. So he is telling that particular, the raindrops that were not the first, he's saying, he's consoling them by saying, okay, don't think you have lost the opportunity to become a pearl, because having missed that opportunity, now you have the chance of becoming a tear that comes out of the eye of the lover. Becoming a pearl can be the curing part, but becoming a tear is the healing part. So, you know, आँखों में है वो कतरा जो गौहर न हुआ था. That's the most beautiful line, I think, and teaches me so much about pain and about grief and about just the difference between a pearl and a tear that Ghalib explains so in such a profound way, I think.
Amin Saab. Assalamu alaikum.
हमें रश्क है आप पर कि माशाल्लाह जो आपकी अंडरस्टैंडिंग है और जो आप जिस तरीके से गुफ्तगू करती हैं, तो हम तो आपके शहर में खो जाते हैं. और दूसरी बात यह है कि जिस तरीके से आप एक्सप्लेन कर रही हैं, उससे महसूस होता है कि आपकी जो अपनी शेर फहमी, और जैसा आपने ख़ुद भी कहा कि मेरी जो शेर फहमी है वो बला की है और ख़ूबसूरत है, और ज़ाहिरी बात है जब आप इतना डीपली उसको समझती हैं तभी जाके आप उसके इश्क में गिरफ्तार हो जाती हैं. अभी आपने एक बड़ा खूबसूरत सा शेर पढ़ा कि इब्ने मरियम हुआ करे कोई, गालिब का दर्द कोई समझ ही नहीं सकता जब तक कि उसकी लाइफ हिस्ट्री ना जाने। उसने 10 साल की उम्र से और मरते दम तक जो दुख और तकलीफ उसने सहे हैं, उस एक शेर में उसने समो दिए। कुछ इस बारे में आप रोशनी डालना पसंद फरमाएंगी?
Sorry, thank you so much for your beautiful remarks. But sorry, what is the question? The one share that
Can summarize.
कि इब्ने मरियम हुआ करे कोई
जी
जी, और फिर उसने जो दूसरा मिसरा कहा है, उसने अपनी तकलीफ का इजहार किया कि मेरे दर्द की, मेरे दुख की दवा करे कोई। और उसका जो दुख है वो राइट फ्रॉम द चाइल्डहुड स्टार्ट हो जाता है। जब उसके वालिद का इंतकाल हो जाता है, उसके चाचा जो हैं वो उसकी किफ़ालत नहीं कर पाते, और उसको जो है वजीफ़ा जो है उसको हासिल करना एक क़यामत हो जाता है, और उसकी सारी ज़िंदगी, फिर उसके बच्चे मर रहे हैं और सब कुछ हो रहा है। तो गालिब की हिस्ट्री को समझे बगैर गालिब के दर्द को समझा नहीं जा सकता। ये मेरा सवाल है कि इसमें कुछ आप एलिब्रेट कर सकती हैं
हाँ।
कि कुछ थोड़ा सा गालिब को, ताकि ये पता चले कि गालिब का दर्द है क्या। ये हम सब कहते हैं कि मेरी ज़िंदगी बड़ी दर्द से गुजरी, तकलीफ से गुजरी, लेकिन नो वन नोज कि दर्द होता क्या है। ये मेरा सवाल था।
By the way, Amin is the president of the Urdu Institute in Chicago. So he holds a lot of conferences regarding Ghalib and all that. So you'll find him also equal authority as you.
Oh. Okay, I'm duly intimidated, first of all. What is an oncologist supposed to say to a serious Urdu reader and Ghalib scholar? So I abjure authority immediately to you. My love for Ghalib is as a reader, and my love for his poetry is as someone who not just the messages that he's giving, but just the love of the language itself, the culture. Imagine the exquisite courtesy culture that produces a language that has the power of expressing these emotions. That is what has ravished me about Urdu, the culture behind it also. Because one of my friends, Zahida Hina, once explained this to me, कि उर्दू लिखने के लिए, सही खुशखती के लिए, लोगों की पोरों को 6-6 महीने के लिए हलवे में बांधा जाता था पहले, कि इतनी नरम हो जाए कि सही लिखी जाए. That is the kind of language we are talking about, and it is a language that contains the power to express these emotions. You know, I have become a kind of an obsessive fan of this great author. Some people don't consider her great, Elena Ferrante. I just read her book called In the Margins, which is a collection of 3 essays. And in one of them, she quotes this Renaissance Italian poet, female poet, from 1500s. And she quotes her as saying, her name is Garza, Stampa. The last name is Stampa, Stampa. So this woman, poet, Stampa, says, if love has the ability to lift and elevate me to such grand heights, then why cannot it make my pain and pen the same?
Wow.
And that's what I mean, that in order to be able to express your pain by pen is impossible. The beauty of Ghalib, though, that I have admired greatly, is that even in the worst of times that he is going through, personal tragedy,
Ghadar,
tragedies के पूरी दिल्ली में उस
उजड़ गई.
वक्त घुटनों घुटनों खून था. What he lives through, and yet there is a certain freshness, a certain humor that is so unique and so inimitable with Ghalib. क्या फर्ज है कि सबको मिले एक सा जवाब? क्या फर्ज है कि सबको मिले एक सा जवाब? आओ ना हम भी सैर करें कोहे तूर की. Think of the freshness of this and the liveliness that he has, the kind of he has a joy in living. क्या फर्ज है कि सबको मिले एक सा जवाब? Moses goes to Tur and there he can only see a burning bush, but it's not necessary that I will get the same answer. But the word that catches me in this sher is sair kare. I mean, he has lightened the whole thing by saying he's not going there praying and thinking, you know, I'm going to be obsessive about this God, please show me an image. Hum to sair karne ja rahe hain. I mean, so my answer to your question is that the uniqueness of Ghalib is that he suffers through great pains, and yet his poetry is just so lively and full of shokhi, which no other poet achieved. That there is fikr and there is shokhi. And without Ghalib's letters and without Hali's writing the Yadgar-e-Ghalib, we would not know Ghalib. Because all those aspects that you so beautifully mentioned have all come to light because of these things. And Ghalib knew that his letters are going to survive, and that is why the way he wrote them and the way we learn about his life through Hali quoting those and then the letters coming out. And yet I have never found Ghalib to be someone who's reveling in pain. He understands the universal human pain, but he doesn't try to simply write about that.
Pain,
even pain he lightens in
not personal
many places.
pain.
Yeah,
it's more universal. Well, Ji, go ahead. Yes, young person.
It's fine.
My question to you is, which books and just poets in general would you recommend to someone who wants to get more into Urdu poetry? And which books did you yourself also use when you first started getting into it?
Well, I'm delighted to hear that you would be interested in Urdu poetry. That's just great. I did a trick on my own daughter, Shehrazad. And the trick was that I started teaching her Urdu shairs when she was 2.5. At 3 years of age, I taught her this shair. Asad hum wo junu jaulan gadaye besaropa hain कि है सरपंज मिशगान आहू पुश्त खार अपना. Why? Because I knew that you can only pronounce Urdu words correctly to a certain age. If you don't learn to pronounce them correctly, तो वो घोड़े को घोड़ा कहेगी फिर बड़े होके. And that I couldn't stand. So I started teaching her Ghalib verses when she was 2.5, and the trick I played was that once she grows up and even gets to understand the meaning of a few couplets, she will be ravished for life like me, and she will get interested. And I think it did happen to some extent, because to this day, as an undergrad at Columbia University, she took Urdu for heritage speakers and even wrote a ghazal herself, which I, of course, rejected immediately. It was horrible. But she's like a cassette recorder. You can press on and then she'll just start the whole thing. Yeah. You know, Iqbal and Faiz and Ghalib. One of the most beautiful things, because I'm back in Chicago, I was telling Seema over lunch that it's so odd to be back in Chicago. It feels like all the life I had here happened to someone else, because so much has happened to me in the last 20 years. Ajnabi शहर के अजनबी रास्ते मेरी तन्हाई पर मुस्कुराते रहे. मैं बहुत देर यूं ही चलता रहा, तुम बहुत देर तक याद आते रहे। फिर कुछ ऐसा हुआ, मैं बहुत थक गया, इसलिए सुन के भी अनसुनी कर गया। इतनी यादों के भटके हुए कारवां, कितनी यादों के भटके हुए कारवां, दिल के कदमों के दर खटखटाते रहे, दिल के जख्मों के दर खटखटाते रहे। What a beautiful concept. मैं बहुत दूर तक यूं ही चलता रहा, तुम बहुत देर तक याद आते रहे। फिर कुछ ऐसा हुआ, मैं बहुत थक गया, इसलिए सुन के भी अनसुनी कर गया। कितनी यादों के भटके हुए कारवां, दिल के जख्मों के दर खटखटाते रहे। जहर मिलता रहा, जहर पीते रहे, यूं ही मरते रहे, यूं ही जीते रहे। How beautiful.
How खूबसूरत।
One last question over here.
अस्सलाम वालेकुम। दो सिंपल क्वेश्चन है हमारा। जैसे इब्न मरियम हुआ करे, कोई अमीन साहब ने सवाल किया था, इसमें सारे अशार अच्छे हैं, उसमें से एक बहुत सिंपल सा शेर है, बक रहा हूँ जुनू में क्या क्या कुछ ना समझे खुदा करे कोई। इसका बैकग्राउंड क्या है?
Sorry, I don't know.
इसका बैकग्राउंड
आप बताइए।
जहाँ तक मेरे जहन में ये है कि इब्न मरियम जब शेर कहते कहते उनका जहन फिर उनके मतलब पर गया, इब्न मरियम, उन्होंने समझा होगा ये भी सन ऑफ गॉड होंगे, उन्होंने शिर्क किया होगा अपने जहन में, तो अपने जहन को साफ करने के लिए उन्होंने कहा कि बक रहा हूँ जुनू में क्या क्या कुछ न समझे खुदा करे कोई।
बहुत अच्छे, बहुत खूब।
एक और शेर है जो आपने अभी पढ़ा है कि क्या था कि नहीं आते तो क्या है वो आतिश का जो शेर है, आतिश लगाए न बने
जी, इश्क पर जोर
हाँ,
नहीं है ये वो आतिश गालिब,
हाँ जी जी,
कि लगाए न लगे।
तो इसमें ये मुझे मालूम है कि हमारी बज़्म में है, आज भी गालिब ही गालिब हैं, लेकिन छोटी मुंह बड़ी बात मैं कर रहा हूँ कि आतिश लगाना कोई मुहावरा नहीं है, आग लगाना मुहावरा है। तो गालिब से इतनी बड़ी गलती कैसी हो गई?
I would say because he was a master, mashallah, and he was so confident that that he could do this. You know, this reminds me, this reminds me of a very lovely ghazal in which, you know, you have only like 20 to 25 words to play with in 2 lines, right? Yeah. So you have to give a profound message in 2 lines using 25 words. So every word you use is so important, in other words, right? Well, Mustar Khair Abadi, a very amazing classical poet, उनकी एक गज़ल है in which he uses the same word twice, because that's a no-no usually. You are not supposed to. उदू को छोड़ दो फिर जान भी मांगो तो हाजिर है, तुम ऐसा कर नहीं सकते तो ऐसा हो नहीं सकता। तुम्हें चाहूं तुम्हारे चाहने वालों को भी चाहूं, तुम ऐसा कर नहीं सकते और ऐसा हो नहीं सकता। And then he comes to this शेर, अभी मरते हैं हम, जीने का ताना फिर न देना तुम। What a gorgeous line. अभी मरते हैं हम, जीने का ताना फिर न देना तुम, ये ताना उनको देना जिनसे ऐसा हो नहीं सकता। इलाजे दर्द दिल तुमसे मसीहा हो नहीं सकता, तुम अच्छा कर नहीं सकते, मैं अच्छा हो नहीं सकता। उदू को छोड़ दो फिर जान भी मांगो तो हाजिर है, तुम ऐसा कर नहीं सकते और ऐसा हो नहीं सकता। अच्छा, then he comes to this amazing last शेर, दमे आखिर मेरी बाली पे मजमा है हसीनों का, First of all, just the concept. And this is coming after अभी मरते हैं हम जीने का ताना तुम न देना फिर ये ताना उनको देना जिनसे ऐसा हो नहीं सकता दमे आखिर मेरी बाली पे मजमा है हसीनों का फरिश्ता मौत का फिर आए पर्दा हो नहीं सकता
बहुत खूब, बहुत खूब.
थैंक यू
बहुत खूब.
बहुत शुक्रिया थैंक
Well,
यू हेलो
I think we would.
एक और ले लेंगे
Sorry?
One more.
One. Okay.
Assalamualaikum. Thank you very much. आपका explanation आपका बहुत ज़बरदस्त है. I've been watching you on YouTube and I've admired you and it's just an extreme honor to be in your presence. तो मेरा एक सवाल है आपने गालिब के दुख दर्द की इतनी सारी बातें की. I wanted to find out कि did he relate to any female dukh? Like, I mean, आपने हर उसने मेल की बात की मैं इस चीज़ से गुजर रहा हूँ उस चीज़ से गुजर रहा हूँ. Did he understand the female concept of dard? And do you equate any poet or any shair, a female shair, to Ghalib?
Not to my knowledge, darling. I don't think Ghalib ever differentiated between male or female or
Gender.
white or black. I mean, his concerns are all universal. And no, I don't know any female poets that I would equate with him, really. Ghalib is, I would say, just in a different stratosphere where very few poets have reached. And this is why I think this particular magnificent space, thanks to Shireen and Afzal, is so important, because Ghalib is someone that every American should be reading. Just like Pakistanis, we have Shakespeare in our course, we read the great poets from here. It's important to introduce our great poetry because it is so profound and so beautiful, and that's why we attempted with the interpretation in the book. I hope that Shireen has said that she'll find someone to publish, because we can't find a publisher here. We published it from Penguin, India, so you can only buy it in the subcontinent. It's not
Not so many
available here.
copies also. Well, I would. I know that there are more questions
There's
coming
just
up.
one young man who
Okay,
wants
you
to
want
say
Okay,
something.
go ahead. Okay.
I have this one question, and it's more like a comment on my understanding, the little that I've understood Ghalib, especially with regards to contemporary, rock and other. There's a certain taste that he imparts in his poetry, despite of all the contextualization, if you give it, all stuff and Ghalib ki baat ki or baki. But he still thinks in one of his shares, he describes that मत पूछ क्या क्या हाल है मेरा तेरे पीछे तू देख के क्या रंग है मेरा तेरे आगे.
बहुत अच्छा.
वो अपने आप को एक तरह से प्रेजेंट कर रहे हैं despite of all those circumstances, social, political, कि what a person with character should take up in those times. And हमारे भी कुछ हालात मुख्तलिफ नहीं होते, वक्त बदलता है, लेकिन क्या that you think कि this a lesson in it, how to stand up in face of adversity? And secondly, it's a two-year question. Do you think that I have the chance of read an article in New York Times on your book, The First Self, and there's similar identification. Do you think that you relate to Ghalib in all that you had to go through?
Yes.
I'm so moved that young people like you are so involved. That's just wonderful. Thank you so much. And that share is so lovely. मत पूछ के क्या हाल है मेरा तेरे पीछे तू देख के क्या रंग है मेरा तेरे आगे क्या तेरा मेरे आगे. I mean, just the concept of it. It's as my friend Arfa Sayyida Zahra says that it's a little different expression of love than I love you too. But yes, I must say that in Ghalib he's only got 1802 shares. That's it. It's a very small collection compared to other people like Mir or Momin or Zauq. Ghalib is very frugal and sparse, but yet in those 1802 shares, I have never come across a problem in my life that I have not found expressed or commented upon, or Ghalib offering a solution about. Never a problem that is not answerable by Diwan-e-Ghalib. You just have to read and understand, because everything you meet in life you're going to find expressed in one way or another in his poetry. I mean, can I just recite one short
Yes,
ghazal?
we would love for you to recite your favorite ghazal.
My favorite.
If
okay.
I have to do this, I'm not saying what you had for lunch.
Well, just apropos of what you were saying also about what book would I recommend, and I didn't recommend any book, because really you just have to start reading poetry wherever you find it and you are moved by it, and this one thing will lead to another and another. So I would say that just start reading poetry, and if you want to read Urdu poetry, begin with Ghalib is what I say, and then you can move on to others easily. But there's a meditation on aging by Ghalib, which I'm so particularly seduced by it, because it's not about aging as a chronological aging. Rather, it's a loss of a certain vitality that comes with aging, that he's mourning in this ghazal. वो फिराक और वो विसाल कहाँ, वो शबो रोजो माहो साल कहाँ. I mean, the way he's वो फिराक और वो विसाल कहाँ, वो शबो रोजो माहो साल कहाँ, थी बस एक शख्स के तसव्वुर से अब वो रानाई ये ख्याल कहाँ. इतना आसान नहीं लहू रोना, दिल में ताकत जिगर में हाल कहाँ. दिल तो दिल वो दिमाग भी न रहा, शोर सौदाए खत तो खाल कहाँ. किसी के फीचर्स और काउंटेनेंस देख के जो दिल में शोर उठता था वो कहाँ है. वो फिराक और वो विसाल कहाँ. अच्छा थी. Then he comes to this gorgeous शेर के हमसे छूटा कुमार खाने इश्क, the gambling dens of ishq. We don't go there anymore. Why? हमसे छूटा कुमार खाने इश्क, वहाँ जो जाएं गिरा में माल कहाँ. Because when you're gambling in ishq, what do you gamble with? Your body, your beauty, your physical fitness, you know, your energy that comes with it. It's all gone. You know. तो हमसे छूटा कुमार खाना इश्क, वहाँ जो जाएं गिरा में माल कहाँ. फुर्सते कारोबार शौक किसे. You see, love is a give and take. It's a karobar, it's a commerce. फुर्सते कारोबार शौक किसे, शौक नज़ारे जमाल कहाँ. नज़ारे जमाल, the sighting of beauty. You have lost even that desire to sight the glory of the beloved. I mean, just think of it. Fursate karo, that leisure. Fursate karobar shauq kise. Zauq nazare jamal kahan. And then muzmahil ho gaye qaba ghalib. मुज़महिल हो गए क़वा ग़ालिब, अब अनासिर में एतदाल कहाँ. What a gorgeous meditation on aging, and he writes this when he's 17 years old.
Wow. Unbelievable.
This is what defines a genius, because he's able to move back and forth into time, forwards and backwards. I told you, he goes back into आपने जो पढ़ा था.
Yeah.
उनके नाखून हुए मोहताज हिना मेरे बाद.
Envision वो जो है, बिल्कुल जी ढूंढता है फिर वही फुर्सत के रात में
बैठे रहें तसव्वुर जाना
किए हुए था मैं गुलदस्ता अहबाब की बंदिश की गया.
How gorgeous.
हुए मेरे
Yeah.
मेरे बाद.
ये जो शेर सायरा ने अभी पढ़ा, it's a शेर that was taken out of the दीवान.
And then, yes.
तो ये दीवान में नहीं है, as you might know, कि था मैं गुलदस्ते अहबाब की बंदिश की गिया. I was that knot of grass that tied together the bouquet of flowers of my friends. So if you undo the knot, all the friends are going to fall apart. था मैं गुलदस्ते अहबाब की बंदिश की गिया, मुतफर्रिक हुए मेरे रुफ़क़ा मेरे बाद. बारे आराम से हैं अहले जफा मेरे बाद.
फकत इस शौक में पूछी हैं हजारों बातें, मैं तेरा हुस्न तेरे हुस्ने बयां तक देखूं. So, you know, we are honored. The time is limited. So, but I think we have set a stage for her to come again and again. So
you couldn't have said it better.
Love
yes.
Chicago, always ready
Yes,
to
yes.
come.
You know,
there is one and only Azra. So please, you know, you have to come back.
Right. And an afternoon with Azra and Ghalib, it's a unique pleasure.